Just
Danke. All right, so we're going to start cruising through kind of like a more nuanced definition of what good summary is and why we use it. Up until this point, we have been working on kind of like locating main ideas, locating main points, trying to articulate those main ideas and points into our own words. Now we're going to try to get a bit of a bigger perspective about how we summarize and what we use it for. So the nuts and bolts of summarizing. Summarizing means presenting information from others that you present in your own words, including that which you paraphrase. An interesting thing that some fella said is that I was talking with at that university thing I went to last week. Guy came in and he said, kind of weirdly, he doesn't let students quote in any of their papers. And everyone's mouth dropped on the floor. All the teachers that were there. What do you mean you don't let anybody quote? You have to quote in your papers. He said, no, I do not allow any quotes because he found that students were lazy when they were using quotes. They would use quotes instead of understanding what the author was saying and putting it into their own words. So his papers, he doesn't allow quotes because he says that students use quotes as an out. If they don't understand something, they'll just find a quote that sounds smart by somebody and put it in there. So the putting complicated ideas in your own words is an important point and something that we're going to play around with. It's important if you're writing as a dialogue with other competing and supporting thoughts and opinions, then being able to summarize another author's point is an essential skill. We're going to move on in a little bit from summarizing what somebody else says to being able to sort of put competing points of view, including your own, together. And in order for you to write something like that is like a serious research document, you're going to need to interact with somebody else's full ideas instead of just presenting them and disproving them. That's not to say that like the papers you write in another class are bad because you just use somebody's point in order to immediately disprove it. This is just to say that if we're going to move to a more kind of like nuanced academic language, you're going to need to be able to have these things exist together at the same time. The trick is that you must be true to what the author says while emphasizing the different aspects of what they say that interests you. So let's say, for example, Gladwell Food Fight. We all listened to it. We understood it. Life was great. Now, let's pretend that you were writing a paper about inequality in terms of the amount of money that different colleges have at their disposal. So that's not necessarily exactly what Gladwell's talking about, right? His essay is more of the decisions that people make and the consequences of those decisions. You want to write about inequality that exists in higher education. So what part of Gladwell's podcast would you focus on if you're going to summarize part of Gladwell's podcast for your paper about inequality in higher education?
He talks about like the endowment, but
right.
We're still trying to offer like.
Awesome. Yep, absolutely. So you would summarize that part because that is the part that is relevant to what you're talking about over here. Does that make sense? It's an important decision and it's an important distinction to make. Easy mistakes to make when you summarize. You might want to jot these down because these are going to be things that I jam you on. You summarize the topic instead of the argument. This is a classic student mistake. In general, it means you're summarizing things too generally. A bad summary like this would be Gladwell's podcast is about different eating choices at colleges and how colleges help or hurt poor students. Now that's bad because it's way too broad. Gladwell brings up a number of specific and incisive points. And if you don't speak specifically, you're not doing yourself any favors. The other mistake, you summarize every single thing that's in there. If you were to summarize Gladwell's his podcast, what sort of information could you leave out?
A lot of facts.
Food descriptions.
The food descriptions. Could you leave out the entire thing about food if you wanted to and still get to his main point? Yeah, you could. I mean, certainly does the food stuff help? Is it an illustrative example? Absolutely. But is it necessary in all cases? No. So summarizing everything, that's a bugaboo. And then making lists of what others say with no clear focus. This would involve you just saying, okay, here's his main idea from the beginning, his main idea from the middle, his main idea from the end. And you just sort of present those three different main ideas without including any transitional language to indicate how that stuff relates to one another. So these are the three biggest mistakes. The best thing you can do to write great summary is put yourself in the author's shoes. It's called the believing game. You write from the perspective of the author you are summarizing, even if you disagree with it. So if you are going to write a paper in which you destroy Gladwell's point, you say Gladwell is so off base. People get what they deserve, and if you work hard enough, you'll get what you want. So let's say you're going to write that paper, and you're summarizing Gladwell. When you're summarizing Gladwell, it's still important that when you present his summary, how do you present it? In his words, as though you believe it. When I'm reading your summary of Gladwell in your paper that's going to destroy Gladwell, I should still be able to get the sense that you are presenting those ideas honestly and on their own terms. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't get to disagree with them. Certainly, you bring up how they're wrong later. But when you're talking about, hey, here's what Gladwell's saying, you have to be true to what that author is saying. And this is, if you look, I don't know if anyone follows politics or political discourse, this is the thing that is lost 100% of the time because people are just struggling to try to present these ideas through their own worldview. It's something.
That's not a problem.
That's not, yeah. You say torture. I say harsh, enhanced interrogation.
You say lies. I say untruth.
Yeah. Readers should not be able to tell if you agree or disagree with what you're summarizing. And what happens when you project bias? You produce summaries that undermine the credibility to your readers. Consider this summary here of David Zinchenko's Don't Blame the Eater, the one about fast food and guys being chubby and then getting into the Navy and then finding mislabeled salads at fast food companies. Don't Blame the Eater is nothing more than an angry rant in which he accuses the fast food companies of an evil conspiracy to make people fat. I disagree because these companies make blah, 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 blah. How does this distort the argument that's presented in Don't Blame the Reader? What sort of words and phrases pop out as alarming in here?
Angry
rant. Why is that fake news?
It's kind of painted as like a smear campaign.
He's given facts.
Yeah. Is it an angry rant?
No.
Is he angry at any point? No. This is written by somebody who disagrees with what Zinchenko is saying, and so they try to undermine Zinchenko's credibility by misrepresenting what he wrote. We already talked about tone. In what other ways is this disingenuous?
Evil conspiracy.
Why is evil conspiracy busted? Why shouldn't that not be in here? Yeah. And does it say, is this a conspiracy with like a capital C, or is this just, some decisions fast food companies are making to try to maximize their profits? There's a big difference between the two. So evil conspiracy, disingenuous. And does he ever imply that fast food companies are trying to make people fat? No. Fast food companies are trying to do what? Make money. Okay. So this summary here, this is terrible. With a capital T, terrible. Another problem, you quickly abandon the summary and rush to present your own response. Now, you're fortunate right now because we're not worried about responses just quite yet, but that is something that's coming down the way. Several studies, Crackle, Pop, and Snap, suggest that these policies are harmless. Moreover, other studies argue that they even have benefits. But, so this is, let me rewind. So, quickly abandon the summary in order to present your own response. So this would be, hey, here's what Gladwell says, and you just kind of like quickly touch on it without presenting the full entirety of his argument, and then you move on to what you want to say. So that would be the problem. Down here, when you're summarizing meta-analysis, it's okay to condense. Meta-analysis means it's research of research. So let's say that Pope wrote an article, Shader wrote an article, Beasley wrote an article, Wink wrote an article. All of you did your own independent research studies about how cool people wear Patagonia shirts.
Yeah.
You know, so
Is that what 5 is?
no, that's just fact. It's research. You conducted studies, and that's what you found out. You know, so Pope found this out, you found that out, Beasley found this out, you found that out. Okay, if I were to summarize all of your stuff, that would be considered a meta-analysis. And when you're summarizing a bunch of different research, then it's okay to condense things. Does that make sense? So it'd be like Pope, Shader, and Beasley suggests that Patagonia sweatshirts are super duper warm. Moreover, other studies by Wink, Rivard, and Headley argue that even though they're warm, they can be too warm inside, period. Got it? When you're trying to summarize a single author, you must tell your readers enough so that they can assess the author's merits on their own, independent of you. Again, all of this is to say that when you're writing somebody else's ideas, you need to present them in a way that would allow someone else to read your summary and make a judgment without being informed by you. You can still inform them later. If you think of a paragraph as this long, this much is summary. If I just read this part, I should be able to make my own decisions. But then I read your perception of this part, and then that gives me some more argumentative things to take care of. And that's fine. But in the part where you're summarizing, you need to be faithful and true to what you are summarizing. Problem with quick summary, you fall victim to the closest cliche syndrome. What gets summarized is not the view of the author in question, but a familiar cliche that writers mistake for the author's views. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail goes from a passionate defense of civil disobedience to a plea for everyone to just get along. I don't know if you've read that or not. He is not saying, let's just get along. Hey, but when you're trying to summarize something quickly, you're prone to make mistakes like that. And you also need to know where you're going. At the same time, you fairly represent what someone else says. You also must exert a quiet influence with your response in your mind. So this is kind of like the art of writing. When you are writing about something that you're about to agree or disagree with, the order in which you present these findings, coupled with what you're going to say, is important. Good summary has a focus that allows the summary to fit with your own agenda while being true to what the text you're summarizing. You want to make sure that the issue you're summarizing is an issue that matches your argument or point. We're going to get that to more when we start diving into making your own points. Take a look at this paragraph here. This is what I would consider to be, for the most part, a pretty good example of a summary of Zinchenko's "Don't Blame the Eater." This is a paragraph that, for the most part, accurately represents what Zinchenko is saying. For the most, is not biased, does not fall prey to cliche. However, there is one sentence in here that I would say is critically wrong or critically misstated. So I want you to read this in part to read an example of a good summary, and in part to try to find the kind of mine in our cornfield. When you think you've located the bad sentence, put a star next to it and raise your hand so I can come by and see what you came up with. Ready, set, go. Too good for this day. If you don't get it, don't feel too bad. You haven't read this article in a long, long time.
Totally.
Child's play.
So I guess you have to.
I don't know what all the fuss is about. No. The sentence that is gross misrepresentation. Hey. That's a state fifth place finisher right there. She knows what she's about.
Did you get it? Distance.
Nope. All right. Class, what were some things about this paragraph that made this good summary?
It's not biased.
Non-biased, right?
Told by the other perspective.
Presented Zinchenko's point on Zinchenko's grounds, right? Did this do a good job of accurately representing Zinchenko's ideas? Yeah. Did it fully represent his ideas? Not the very last sentence. Okay, so that gets to where this is a misrepresentation of Zinchenko. For the most part, this does a good job of, in paragraph form, almost walking through Zinchenko's essay by linking together the main ideas. So if you think about what we did last week, this would be a good example of that. We have the different main ideas that Zinchenko represents. Parents don't have time. Fast food is readily available. Fast food companies mislead people with their advertising. All of that's in here and linked in a way that allows it to flow. And then it gets to the very end. Zinchenko's hope is that with a new spate of lawsuits against the fast food industry, other children with working parents will have healthier choices available to them and that they will not, like him, become obese. Is that Zinchenko's hope with the lawsuit? No. And again, this is hard because you haven't read it in a while. What is Zinchenko's hope with the lawsuit?
Wasn't it kind of highlights the issues more than
The fast food companies would more accurately label what they're doing, right? And by labeling what they're doing, then what happens? People make informed choices. That's his hope with the lawsuit. So this is tricky because it sounds smart, right? And it sounds like it makes sense. However, when you're considering Zinchenko, this is a misrepresentation. Another sheet I gave you. This bad boy right here, Zinchenko's essay, Don't Blame. This is a more robust version of a summary. This is just for your records, just read this. Now, this one is a doozy, you'll notice, because how long is this? If we were to double space this bad boy, we would end up with about as many pages as the original article. Now, up until now, you would probably say, that's bad. Summary is supposed to be much shorter. However, if summarizing somebody's entire article in great detail was critical to a point that you were trying to make, you might end up with something that looks like this. You should not think that because something is summary, that doesn't mean that you can just, or that means you can just breeze through it and cruise with cliches. The most important things are you are non-biased and accurate in your representation of somebody else's ideas. The last thing that you have in front of you is just a bunch of different ways that you can introduce or talk about ideas. So when you're trying to talk about how something has a cause-effect relationship with something else, these are just a bunch of fun words to include to help your sentences flow on. You're gonna need to bring this back tomorrow. You're gonna need to bring Gladwell back tomorrow. We're gonna start playing around with writing a Gladwell summary tomorrow for the Vassar College Business. So if you're a little fuzzy with it because you listened to it on Friday, I mean, it's pretty interesting. Let's do it again. Oh, the big summaries.
Yeah.
See, when I was gone, I missed the article on
See, but right now,
Uh-huh.
right now there's a shortage.
Yeah.
The younger province.
Yeah.
Like, they're like the-
Okay. Is it not on the?
I don't know if that was-
It's not on the classroom.
That was my first. What's yours?
You couldn't what?
Yeah, playing on both.
Oh, like when you clicked on it, it said no go. Let me make sure the sharing permissions are updated,
Hey.
Yeah.
and then you should. The first thing we did was we walked through and we summarized the different main ideas that existed. So here's a paragraph. Where's the summary? There's the paragraph. There's the summary. So you summarize the main ideas in your own words, and then you had to link them all together, stitch it together like a Frankenstein's monster type
Did
thing.
you want our annotations on Friday?
You're gonna hold on to that through our Gladwell summary. So just, I eventually yes. Bro, I didn't get a chance to read it yet. I didn't get a chance to read it yet.
Oh, okay.
How about-
I was just asking if you saw it.
I know, I got it. It's in my collection.
Like that, we're gonna go.
Now you're in the Air Force and signing your life away from the military is not a bad way to go.